Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming back and learning a little bit more about quilts and how they affected our history of this country. Lisa, how are you today?
I'm good.
Have you ever heard of Harriet Tubman?
I have.
What do you know of her?
Well, she helped start the Underground Railroad.
Mhm.
She was called Moses,
Mm-hmm.
and she actually risked her life
Mm-hmm.
many, many, many times just to save her people.
Everything you've said is absolutely true. Here's an amazing picture of her. If you've never seen her, this is a great picture of her. She was not a pretty woman. She was considered homely. She had the most beautiful soul in the world, and it shone on her face and her heart. In 1982, the Smithsonian Institution honored Tubman as the only American woman ever to plan and lead a military raid.
Huh.
Did you know that?
I did not.
This is going to be, I have 6 bedrooms in my B&B. Every single room is going to be named and to honor a woman that I received from this book from Amazing Women of the Civil War by Webb Garrison. And it tells us about various women who did amazing, miraculous things during the Civil War, and of course they never got credit. And this, so every room is going to be named for a woman who should be honored. Harriet Tubman is one of them. Not just because of what she did, which was bring all the people out, but because of what she did during the Civil War. In April, she led a raid in Troy, New York, where she rescued Charlie Nell from slave catchers. She formed the first black group of men to fight in the Civil War. And large numbers of slaves were left abandoned on plantations, and they didn't know what to do. She responded to the plight and was afraid that they were going to enslave them again. But she was managed to get enough. She went to the military hospital in Florida for a brief period. Men were dying of dysentery and were treated with one of Tubman's concoctions of roots and wild plants because she was known as an herbologist.
Huh.
Yeah, there's so much more in depth than people realize. She put together a group of black men who were instructed to destroy railroads and bridges which supplied the rebels and to lead other slaves being held by Confederates. And of course, she has never received credit for any of this. She freed 756 black soldiers, prisoners in the process, without a single loss of life.
Wow.
They destroyed immense amount of cotton. However, they did have one casualty. Her skirt caught fire, unfortunately, but she got out of it safely.
Wow.
Yes. She also was there to see, in July 18th, the Union assault on Fort Wagner. A black unit, the Massachusetts 54 Regiment, was led by a 26-year-old white man. And when he died, she responded to the call and helped bury the dead after the body. She remained in the South for the next year. So not only did she help rescue 756 black prisoners, not only did she form the first black unit of black soldiers, she also conducted a raid that had been successful. We also know her as the conductor. And she died on March 10th, 1913. She has received very little praise. She has received very little recognition in this country. She was known as a nurse. She had a small battle wounds, and yet she never stopped. She did all she could for her people and for the Civil War. And so she is going to be honored, at least in my B&B. Then we have Mary Walker, MD. Mary Walker was a surgeon. She was a licensed, registered surgeon. She also wanted to work in the Civil War. She wanted to help on the battlefield. Well, she was allowed to help on the battlefield. She wasn't allowed to be called a surgeon. She wasn't allowed to be called a nurse. She was given the job of cleaning up the battlefield hospital. That's what they paid her for. The lowest possible job there was. Even though she was a surgeon and she worked right along the other male doctors. She also insisted on doing something highly unorthodox, highly unpopular, and extremely unfeminine. She wore slacks. In the battleground, when she's cutting off arms and legs, she wore slacks. It was quite a repugnant thing for her to do. Here is the only known picture I know of her, and it's not a very good picture, but it's what we have. After the war, she wanted to get paid. She was just funny that way. She just thought they owed her some money for all the work she'd done. Instead, they gave her a Medal of Honor. First woman to ever receive the Medal of Honor. Of course, when the war was over, the next Congress wanted it back. They said women shouldn't get Medal of Honor. They didn't do anything of enough value. She told them to come get it. She never relinquished it. She kept it to the day she died.
Good for her.
She refused to give it up. She also organized a Women's Relief Association. She helped with numerous hospitals so that the poorest of the soldiers could receive support, whereas normally they just lay there dying. Many people were treated in the hospital by those that were wealthy or had family. Their family came and took care of them. Those that didn't have family, those that couldn't afford to hire their own nurses, they were on their own. And those were the ones that she put a relief organization for to help. First known such organization. She even offered to recruit men with criminal backgrounds. They became Walker's U.S. patriots. They told her she was a medical monstrosity because she was a woman wearing pants. Didn't matter her skill level. Didn't matter the hundreds of lives she saved. She wore pants. She is my hero. So one of the rooms is going to be named after Mary Walker, M.D. I think here is a woman we should all honor. Because how many of us would go against convention? How many of us would take the scorn and the rudeness and the belittlement of our fellow doctors or our fellow man because we just walked a slightly different line? Now I'd like to tell you about a spy. Her name is Elizabeth Van Leeuw. And Elizabeth Van Leeuw was a spy. She was a very clever spy. Crazy like a fox, she was called. She was called Crazy Bet. She became one of the most effective Union operatives behind rebel lines. She was born in 1818, educated by Quakers. Her father had slaves, but when he died, her mother and her brother John and her freed the slaves. Though most of them chose to stay with them and they were fed, they were given a salary. One freed slave was Mary Elizabeth Bosler. And Mary was educated, even though it was against the law to teach blacks to read and write. In this Quaker household, she had been taught to read and write. And Elizabeth would send Mary to some of the houses where the Confederate White House was called. And so when the Confederate President Jefferson Davis and his aides didn't attempt to hide anything from Mary, not anything. She was just a Negro. She was uneducated. She didn't understand anything. She certainly couldn't read anything. She took every word in. She copied many a paper down. and gave it to Elizabeth, who immediately gave it to the Union. Right in the Confederate White House, they had a spy, and Elizabeth put her there. Another amazing thing that Elizabeth did was, have you ever heard of Libby Prison? The
Yeah.
infamous prison where the Confederates kept the Union soldiers. It was like hell on earth. Everything in there was dank, filthy, dirty. She asked for permission to give food, medicine, and humanitarian aid to the prisoners. David H. Todd, who is the half-brother to Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd,
Okay.
was a Confederate soldier. And he finally gave her permission. She became a frequent visitor of Libby Prison, supplying her boys, as she called them, food, clothing, bedding, medicine, and reading material. Her brother John's prospered hardware business provided the money. Here is a picture of Elizabeth. New arrivals at the prison secretly supplied her with information on Confederate troops, which she transmitted to Union headquarters. She also helped escaped prisoners get out of Richmond, Virginia. The most notable escape from Libby Prison took place on February 9, 1864, where, engineered by Colonel Thomas E. Rose, a 53-foot tunnel was dug from a room in the basement to the other side of the street. They used pocket knife, chisel, and a wooden spittoon, a
Wow.
rope, and some cloth. She helped 109 federal soldiers escape. They were hidden in her mansion and other places, and she was the one that directly got them out of Richmond, Virginia. So not only did she have a spy in the Confederate White House, did she help dying people survive in one of the most horrendous known prisons in the United States. She also helped them escape from it. This woman was amazing. She was wealthy. She was a Confederate, from a Confederate family, from her father's side. But she chose to follow the Quaker side of her mother. And she chose to free the slaves and educate them and do all she could. So she is going to be highly honored to have a room in my B&B. Then there is Clarissa Barton. Now you've heard of Clarissa Barton, right? Can you tell me who she is?
Red Cross.
Tell me about the Red Cross.
She started the Red Cross during the Civil War.
Afterwards.
Okay. But she helped
She
take care
brought
of the men, right?
She brought over the Red Cross from Switzerland
Oh.
and started the American chapter. But do you know what else she did that she's not known for? And she doesn't get any credit because she's just a woman. She founded the first missing in action movement with one unpaid assistant and her own money. She went and identified and found the graves of 22,000 soldiers.
Wow. Wow.
On her own because the military wouldn't do it.
Wow.
She had this woman chose to make sure she has every mother, every sweetheart, every wife needs to know where their beloved was dead and where they were buried. And they said they didn't have time for such nonsense, the Army said. But, if you want a little something to do, just run along and do it. That's what she did. She went to the government patent office, and for 80 cents for a sewing book, she was fast with a needle. She went to Bull Run, to the battlefield, and got the names. She badgered every leader who would see her, but for months received nothing but rejection as she tried to find a way. She offered to search for the missing prisoners of war because who cares? It was in her general correspondence with her friend that we find how she launched the beginning of the MIA movement. When she ended this phase of work, she had claimed to identify 16,000 men. And yet today we find out it's closer to 22,000 she found. Then she became acquainted. She took her earnings and she went to visit Geneva, Switzerland, where she became acquainted with this silly little organization called Red Cross. So we know how she brought the Red Cross here. Did you know she helped with the Treaty of Geneva Convention? The Treaty of Geneva?
No.
She was one of the founders of that. She never did get any credit for that, did she? In 1882, Clara Barton persuaded President Chester Arthur to put his influence behind a silly little movement to get Congress to ratify Geneva Treaty. The American Red Cross then came into existence, and she became the angel of the Civil War because she was the first president. She extended the scope of the organization to include any great national calamities such as hurricanes, tornadoes, forest fires, earthquakes, etc. She is notably the most decorated woman in American history.
Wow.
But she remained a maverick to the end.
You're kind of a woman.
Because she was so unconventional, she was constantly under criticism. They did nothing but find fault with her. She just had enough of such indignities. She told them to take the Red Cross and go put it somewhere else. You decide where. She promptly founded a rival society, the National First Aid of America. So if she had only done what she'd been told, she could have stayed on the government payroll until retire. But no, that wasn't her way of life. She chose another way. She chose to start another organization that was more independent, that was not relied upon the government, and stood on its own 2 feet. She is known for the Red Cross. She is not known for any of the others. But because of what she did, the Missing in Action, and we now have the slogan, "No man left behind or woman," she is the one that brought them home to their families. And for that reason, she has a room named in the room. And then there's Dorothea Dix. Have you heard of Dorothea?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about Dorothea.
Is she a doctor?
She was a nurse.
A nurse.
Mm-hmm. And what did nurses have to do?
Take care of the men and.
That's right. But did you know most nurses were male? She formed the first female nurses to care for the wounded during the Civil War. She had the audacity to bring women onto the battlefield, to actually literally take the dying, off the battlefield so they didn't become the dead.
What a strong woman.
Yes. Yes. She found out that there wasn't enough. Back then, when you had a deep wound, you had to pack it. They packed it with surgical lint. Surgical lint is simply taking fabric, unraveling it, and taking all that lint that falls and gathering it. And she did that. She found out they needed a surgical necessity. She organized women in Boston, and who organized more women, and they sent bag after bag of this lint so that they could take care of the men who were dying because their wounds wouldn't get infected then. She also put together bags of donations of jelly, milk, eggs, and even chickens from the Washington State area, or D.C. area. And to prevent scurvy, she she informed the public to get more fruit and such inside. She also wanted to develop an all-female nursing corps, which was more considerate by then. However, the War Department finally decided to accept her services, but she put an ad in the paper for women. Let me read the ad. No woman under 30 need apply to serve in the government hospitals. All nurses are required to be plain-looking women. Their dresses must be brown or black, with no bows, no curls, no jewelry, and no hoop skirts. That's a very practical woman. They weren't there to get married or be flirted with, but I can assure you, ugly or not, those men were after them. I promise you. They all had to be interviewed and approved by Dix. She seldom modified her strict instructions. There was one woman, though, who she thought was remarkable. And she did make an exception because she had this costume. It was called a cycling costume. And Dix found it perfect for a hospital costume. It became what all of her nurses wore. A gray cottonish cross-grained skirt and a zoic jacket that allowed her arms to move freely. So the skirt had a slit up the second. Right. Almost, but not quite pants.
Right.
We can't do pants. We do know that's an abomination. So let's not go that far. Almost, not quite. Because they still were full, like a skirt. Just for slits so they could move and bend and, I don't know, more practical? Something like that. You gotta love this, right? You can't make this stuff up. She also erected ways that this was a strictly Catholic group. She was Catholic. So she made it so it was hard for Protestant women, unfortunately. But over time, she just took who she could get. Even though she had been in the Crimean War, which is an English war that was pretty horrific, she said she was not prepared for the aftermath of the first significant battle of the Civil War. Wounded and desperately sick men streamed back from Bull Run in such large numbers that the government installations were just simply overrun. They would just drop where they were, trying to find somebody to take care of them. She hurried from place to place, arranging for the Fairfax Theological Seminary, a Methodist church, and a female seminary to be converted into hospital and marked by yellow bunting. Without her help, these men would have died, because nothing within the government was prepared to take care of the wounded. They just hadn't set up for it. There's a miniature of her, of what she looks like. Thanks to her, women now had the ability to become nurses, work in the war, receive pay. With this system of compensation by the government in place, the size of Dixie's Corps grew to about 50,000 women.
Wow.
Received jobs. Belatedly, because they had not paid her, finally, some 10 years later, they gave her $10,000 to erect a memorial of her in the Civil War. She's only superintendent of women nurses, they called her, not the founder. And for that, she has a room in my B&B. The final woman is Catherine Proskett, who organized and put together 70,000 Army shirts. I'd have trouble with 7. I don't like making shirts. Shirts are not my thing. I mean, I've made them. I don't want to make them. And the reason I give her one is because the majority of the work was done by women behind the scenes. So men went to war, and what happened to them was horrific. There's no two ways about that. On both sides. Here in Gettysburg, 51,000 died that we know of. There's over 20 or 25,000 still missing in action. So the death toll is much higher than we think. But it's the women, when the men left, they left them pregnant. They left them with children. They left them with farms to take care of, ranches to look after. Horses needed to be cared for. Cows needed to be slaughtered. Somebody had to put in the harvest, take the harvest out, put the food up. So the women ended up taking care of the entire farms or wherever they lived by themselves with other women to help them. They did it all. Their chores and everybody else's chores. And they spent their free time, you know how much free time they had, making 70,000 army shirts in just one day.
In one day?
No, I'm sorry, I meant to say that wrong. In one setting.
Okay.
In just one setting. That's just one thing. She found that the men didn't have shirts. A lot of the men, after being wounded or injured, didn't have something to put on. They were without clothing because the military didn't have money to give them clothing or anything. So she started in Ohio, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, spring and summer, got all the women in 1861 to do a Central Relief Association. The women first met in her home and accumulated supplies and clothes. It was because of women on both sides of the war that made quilts. Quilts became a big thing. Quilts were used to be raffled off, to make money, to send supplies. Quilts were used so every man had a bed to sleep with. That was his bed. That was his cover. That was his protection. And if he died, that was his burial shawl. And sadly, not many quilts came back home. Quilts were what kept the men together. It was all the work of the women. So she's to show it's what the women did that has made all the difference. She said, we made over 70,000. The department paid me 14 cents a shirt and furnished the flannel and the buttons. I paid the women 11 cents a shirt, and they can make 4 a day without a machine. Don't ask me how. God bless them. And the remaining 3 cents just covered the cost of linen thread, transportation to and from New York, office and workroom expense. The ladies of Newport helped me cut the shirts. And that's just one thing that was done. Close to $6,000 was earned by members of 100 families who would have gone otherwise unemployed. And that's how they supported their families while the men was at war. She also found out that sanitary supplies was low. So she needed steamboats large enough to hold 1,000 men, chartered and refurbished as floating hospitals. She made the first floating hospitals. They received the sick and wounded straight from the battlefields and transported them to safe destinations. Could you imagine walking with a huge hole in your leg and having to go 5 miles? That's what they had been doing till she started these floating hospitals. One of her first appointees, volunteers, was Mrs. William Preston Griffin. Hearing about the new program, she wrote a letter volunteering her service and boarded the Daniel Webster and went there. Most of the female volunteers were from wealthy families. They were unaccustomed to physical labor. They soon experienced a completely different way of life on the boats. To their credit, they endured it. They stayed there. They went through it because so many people needed their help. This is what one of those floating hospitals look like. I just think it's fascinating how much women have done, how much women help, and the support of women. Without women, men could never kill each other. We're the ones that give them the opportunity to do it. But it certainly was a noble cause they were fighting for, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Something worthy to support.
Yep.
The fact that we had slavery for so many centuries in this country is an abomination. The fact that we chose not to do anything about it for so long is an abomination. That is a stain upon our country that we can never take off. We have to own it, admit it, and move on from it. That's how I feel. If you want to know any more about this, the stories are on Eleanor's Retreat, ELEANORS, or call me, 830-352-5142. I hope you enjoy these stories, and if you want to know any more, just go to Eleanor's retreat. You have a wonderful day now.